rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Hi there, everyone. It's Chris Gregory here, and this is Bob Dylan, A Head Full of Ideas. And this is part 2 of Dylan's songs of social protest, looking at some of his very early songs, a lot of which never actually got recorded at the time. I'm going to begin with the highly polemical Who Killed Davy Moore, which is another what you might call newspaper song. It was never recorded by Dylan, although he played it a number of times in concert in 1963 and 1964. Davy Moore was the world featherweight champion boxer. In March 1963, he lost the title to the Cuban Sugar Ramos after a technical knockout. A little while later, in his dressing room, he began to complain of headaches. He died from brain damage just a few days later. Dylan's use of the framework of the nursery rhyme Who Killed Cock Robin is part of the song's conceit, heavily emphasizing a message that could, by implication, be understood by a child. It's perhaps the first of Dylan's theatrical songs. It has almost no melody, but was very effective when delivered in concert, as it engages the audience in the manner almost of a poetry recital or a storytelling session. Almost the entire lyric consists of dialogue. One of its strengths is the way Dylan creates a separate voice for each character. This indicates the influence of Bertolt Brecht, who used highly literate songs in his plays, voiced by his characters in order to advance the narrative. This is another Dylan song that asks questions which it deliberately does not answer. The question, who killed Davy Moore and what's the reason for, opens every verse and bookends the song at the end. The claims of various possible culprits are examined. All of them give the same response. It wasn't me that made him fall. You can't blame me at all. First, there is the referee, then the crowd, Moore's manager, a gambler, a sports journalist, and finally Sugar Ramos himself. The referee cries, "Don't point your finger at me." He admits that I could have stopped it in the 8th and maybe kept him from his fate. He tells us that the crowd would have booed, I'm sure, not getting their money's worth. Finally, he shrugs, "It's too bad that he had to go, but there was pressure on me too, you know." His assertion that the fight had to continue despite the danger to Moore is hard to sympathise with, as he seems more concerned with financial matters than the welfare of the boxer. The self-justifications made by the personified angry crowd are even less compassionate. "We didn't mean for him to meet his death. We just wanted to see some sweat." The manager, who is described rather stereotypically as puffing on a big cigar, declares coldly, "It's too bad for his wife and kids he's dead, but if he was sick, he should have said." The gambler avoids responsibility by informing us that he had put money on him to win. The boxing writer defends the sport, claiming that American football is just as dangerous and that fist fighting is here to stay. It's just the old American way. Finally, Ramos himself, who Dylan describes memorably as the man whose fists laid him low in a cloud of mists, comes out with the most shocking answer of all, "Don't say murder, don't say kill. It was destiny, it was God's will." We are, of course, expected to see through these hollow declarations. The song appears, at least on a surface level, to be a condemnation of the sport, as all the speakers share the responsibility. But rather than stating that Moore's death was the product of greed or capitalism or of the culture of violence inherent in American society, Dylan allows us to form our own conclusions. The song presents us with a moral quandary. Ramos's final justification invites us to consider the old theological conundrum about God granting free will to human beings. Was the boxer's death preordained for some unknown divine purpose? Or is the final statement an assertion that God himself, rather than any of the speakers, was responsible for the death? What, therefore, are the limitations of the doctrines of free will and predestination? And how come a supposedly loving God can allow such a tragedy to occur? Two of Dylan's early protest songs, John Brown and Hero Blues, focus on the evils of militarism, and in particular on the way that young men are persuaded by the women in their lives to go out and fight. John Brown is a highly sombre tale. The name of the protagonist suggests a kind of uber soldier who represents all men who are deluded by spurious promises of glory in battle. This is another stark and polemical Brechtian drama. The melody is based on the well-known folk tune 900 Miles. No historical or geographical context is supplied, so Dylan clearly intends the song as an expose of how non-combatants can be cheerleaders for war and how naive young men can follow their lead, often with tragic results. The song was first recorded for Broadside, but was never considered for inclusion on a studio album. Dylan, however, seems to have rediscovered it later on in his career, as it was played live, usually with a full band backing, around 200 times between 1990 and 2012. It was also included in the live album MTV Unplugged, recorded in 1994. It certainly has the kind of dramatic structure that works well with a rock arrangement. The opening verses focused exclusively on the mother's point of view. She smiles proudly as her son, resplendent in his uniform, sets off to war. She's clearly given no thought to the danger he will face and is far more concerned with the reflected glory that she supposes he will bring back to her. She tells him, "Do what the captain says, lots of medals you will get, and we'll put them on the wall when you come home." Later, she tells her neighbours, "That's my son that's about to go. He's a soldier now, you know," celebrating his participation in a good old-fashioned war. Dylan comments acidly that she made well sure her neighbours understood. Then, inevitably, the narrative becomes much darker. John's letters stop arriving. After she hears that he is returning, she goes to meet him from a train, but a great shock is in store for her. The description of John's condition is uncompromisingly graphic. His face was all shot up and his hand was all blown off, and he wore a metal brace around his waist. He whispered kind of slow in a voice she did not know, or she couldn't even recognize his face. John is so damaged that he can hardly manage a reply, but it is clear that any idealism he may have had has gone. He tells her that while he was on the battleground, you were home acting proud. You wasn't there standing in my shoes. In the next two verses, he gives us a harrowing description of being caught up in the madness of battle. He soon realizes how futile it all is. "The thing that scared me most," he tells her bitterly, "when my enemy came close, I saw that his face looked just like mine." Perhaps we may imagine that the mother of this enemy, who presumably John has killed, had also proudly sent her boy out to fight. John now realizes that he is just a puppet in a play. In the devastating final lines, we hear that he dropped his medals down into her hand. He has realized, far too late, that he's been manipulated. Although there is little real poetry in the song, and the outcome is arguably predictable, it's powerful and moving, partly because of the way Dylan structures its action and dialogue. The mother's voice dominates the early verses, but it's the heartbreaking riposte of the disillusioned and permanently damaged son that forms the heart of the song. It may not be a subtle message, but it's certainly delivered with great conviction. Hero Blues, which was considered for inclusion on Freewheeling and The Times Are A-Changin' and was recorded as a Whipmark demo, is one of the first Dylan songs that uses the form of the blues for comical effect. It consists of a complaint by a young man that his girlfriend is constantly nagging him to go out and find somebody to fight. Dylan uses a repetition of the first lines of each verse effectively to deliver surprise payoff lines such as this. The comically harassed narrator complains that she is his screaming end, who wants him to be a hero so she could tell all her friends. He tells us that she reads too many books, she got movies inside her head. Like the mother in John Brown, she wants him to fight in order to bolster her own reputation. It's certainly true that the vast majority of war movies and TV shows of the 1950s and the early 60s did tend to glorify war and to avoid any realistic depiction of battlefield carnage. The main comic impact of the song comes in the third verse, in which Dylan drawls, "You need a different kind of man, babe, one that can grab and hold your heart," which he repeats, and this is followed by the unexpected and very funny payoff line, "You need a different kind of man, babe, you need Napoleon Bonaparte." After this, the final verse, depicting the girl proclaiming him to be a hero by his graveside, seems fairly routine. Although the Napoleon line is certainly effective, once you've heard the joke, it does wear a little bit thin after a few listens. On the studio versions, Dylan actually seems to treat it fairly seriously, supplying some heartfelt bluesy vocals. But arguably, it works best in a live context, as demonstrated by the performance at New York Town Hall in May 1963, where Dylan, giggling a little to himself, delivers it rather in the manner of a stand-up comedian. It was revived very briefly as a surprise opening number for the first two shows of the 1974 tour with the band, now functioning as a sardonic comment on the way Dylan himself was being treated as such a hero on his return to touring after an 8-year hiatus. So that's it for now. Tune in to part 3 when the songs get even darker. See you then. Bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?